So the first question, well, actually, before we get into even the questions, I just wanted to kind of go over the test format really quick. So the test is just like the first one. It's open book, open note. And this one is only going to be 15 questions. So not nearly as many questions as the last one. And I would say like 2/3 of the questions are short answer. And so there will be like maybe 2 or 3 parts to the short answer questions that you have to answer. And then there's some matching questions and there's some like order questions. So it shouldn't take as long as the other one did. And it should be a little bit easier for you guys to be able to demonstrate what you learned. So that's the format of the test. I'm hoping that we'll be able to get it all done during class. If we can't though, then I can kind of make some changes to that. But the goal is for everybody to be able to finish it in class. So do you have any other questions about just the test itself before we get into the study guide? Okay, great. Let me have this email open just in case anybody's emailing me, not able to. Were you guys able to get into the study guide or the study session just using the link that I emailed you guys?
It took a while.
Okay, but it ended up working?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Perfect. Let me just email everyone again one more time, just in case somebody forgot. Okay, cool. So then let's get started. The first question is about particles that are found in atoms. So can anybody tell me what those 3 main particles are?
Protons, neutrons, and electrons.
Protons, neutrons. Actually, let me space these out because I'm going to go into each of their qualities here. So I'll start here. Protons, neutrons, and electrons. Okay, so for protons, what is their charge?
Positive.
Yep, so protons are positive. What is the charge of neutrons?
Negative.
Neutral.
Yeah. So neutrons are neutral. So neutral, pro is positive, and then electrons are
Negative.
So this is the easiest way that I remember it is just neutrons neutral. Electrons are, well, we'll get into this next part here. So before I spoil it, where are protons found in an atom?
In the middle.
And do we remember what the middle is called?
Nucleus.
Nucleus. So protons are found in the nucleus. Where are neutrons found? They're also in the nucleus. And then where are electrons found?
On the rim things.
Yeah, so those are called orbitals. And they are found outside the nucleus. Cool. So we have protons, neutrons, and electrons. Protons are positive and they're found in the nucleus. Neutrons are neutral and they're found in the nucleus. Electrons are negative and they're found in the orbitals, which are outside of the nucleus. So that is basically all of the answers to the first question and the second question. Now for the third one on the study guide, it says, how are electrons arranged in orbitals? And how does the first orbital differ from the others? So electrons are in orbitals. The first orbital holds how many electrons are in the first orbital?
2.
Yeah, so 2 electrons are in the first orbital. And then how many are in all the other orbitals? How many can fit in one orbital after the first one is filled?
Is it 4?
8, yeah.
Oh, 8.
Yeah, So the second two infinity orbitals hold 8 electrons. So if you were to draw it, if this is the nucleus, let's say it has, we'll do neon. So we'll do 10 protons, 10 neutrons, and then we've got 2 electrons in the first orbital. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 electrons in the outer orbital, and this would be considered a full atom because it's a noble gas. And if you guys remember, noble elements mean that it's full, it doesn't really react with anything. So this is what a full atom would look like. So that is answer to the next question. Does anybody have any questions about these concepts before we jump into what an element is?
Which one's the answer to number 3?
The answer to number 3, how are electrons arranged in orbitals? It would be this one here. So in the first orbital, there's 2 electrons, and then any of the other orbitals after the first one can hold 8 electrons. And then I drew an example here where there's 2 electrons in the first and then 8 electrons in the second orbital. Okay, I'm gonna erase this. So any other questions about this before I erase it? Cool. I'm going to take silence as a good thing. So if you guys do have questions, just make sure that you hop on the mic because I want to hear them, but I also wanna make sure that we're getting through our stuff so we're not keeping us too long. So the next question is about an element. So does anybody want to give me just a general definition of an element before I give us the answer? What is an element? So an element is so technically an element is just atoms that have the same characteristics. If they have the same number of protons and electrons, then they have then the same chemical behavior. So let me find the slides really quick so I can kind of go with these with you guys in terms of the definitions that you have, because I'm just kind of spitballing all of this off the top of my head and I want to make sure it matches with what's in your slides. So give me 1 second here. Okay. So the definition that you guys have in your slides of an element is, I will let you know once it loads. Okay, so a chemical element, pure substance that consists entirely of one type of atom. So yeah, so it's atoms with the same characteristics. So elements are made of one type of atom. So for example, you have the element hydrogen, and all of the different hydrogen atoms that you'll find are the same in terms of they have the same number of protons and electrons. Remember, the number of neutrons can change. That's when you have an isotope, but the number of protons and electrons will stay the same. And so that means that all of the atoms of the element hydrogen have the same behavior. They do the same thing. So same with helium. All the atoms of helium do the same thing. They have the same protons and electrons. So an element is just all of the types of all of the different types of atoms are different kinds of elements. And essentially, if you were to like go out, you'd find, great, I have like 20 of this kind of atom and they all look exactly the same, means that you have that much of one element. Is this making sense, or would you guys like to have an example? Does the concept of what an element is make sense? Give me like a thumbs up in the chat so I can get some feedback here.
We answered the periodic table one yet.
We're getting to that one next. So if elements make sense, an example would be good. Okay. So let's say I'm looking under a really, really good microscope and it's showing me a ton of different types of atoms. So I'll draw a few of them. I'll draw just the electrons for the sake. The nucleus would be here. I'm just going to draw the electrons so it doesn't take too long. Okay. So in this example, I'm looking under a microscope and I'm looking at all of these different atoms that I have right now. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and identify how many elements I have. And an element, once again, each element is a specific type of atom. So looking here, I've got 1, 2, 3. I have 3 atoms that all seem to have 2 electrons. And then that tells me that I also have 2 protons. I have, let's see, I have 2 atoms that have 4 electrons, and then that tells me I have 4 protons. And then I have this one atom here that has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 electrons, 6 protons. So that tells me that I have 1, 2, 3 different elements because I have 3 different types of atoms. And so all of the atoms that have 2 electrons are one element. All of the atoms that have 4 electrons are another element. And all the atoms that have 6 are a third element. So that's essentially then going into the question about the periodic table. That's what the periodic table shows us. It shows us how many different types of atoms there are and what element each atom is. So it's kind of like we always want to give something a name as scientists. We want to be able to identify things. So by giving each type of atom a name, we are able to identify it next time we see it. And so the element is just the name for that type of atom. And the element is based off of how many protons and electrons it has. And then the protons and electrons determine the kind of behavior that that element has, what it can bond to, what kind of chemicals and molecules it can form, what its behavior is in the world. So, so that's what an element is. And then meanwhile, an atom is just like a single molecule that has protons, neutrons, and electrons. So you can have many different types of atoms. All the different types of atoms are different elements. Does this make sense? I think this example helped. Okay, so then once again, so a periodic table then for the next question, what can we learn about an element when looking it up on a periodic table? Well, if you look at just the like symbol of it, so let's do, we'll just do neon again. I'm hoping that I'm remembering neon correctly. Let me open a periodic table just to be sure. Yes, okay, so neon has this information on the periodic table. Sometimes it has more, sometimes it has less. All periodic tables are different. But essentially, the information that I can get looking at this on the periodic table is that it has an atomic number of 10. So what does my atomic number tell me? Do we remember? what can I find out for my atomic number?
How many protons and electrons there are?
Yes, perfect. So we'll have 10 protons and 10 electrons because our atomic number is 10. And then this is my atomic mass.
Wait, which question are we on?
We are on the question that asks about what can we learn about an element when looking it up on a periodic table.
Oh, okay, I'm still on that. Okay.
Yeah, so then this is our atomic mass. So then what do I do with my atomic mass? What does my atomic mass tell me?
You can find out how many neutrons there are.
Okay, and how do I do that?
Subtract the atomic number by the atomic mass.
Yeah, perfect. So my atomic mass is my atomic number, or rather, technically it's my atomic number, but it's more specifically, my atomic mass is the number of protons plus the number of neutrons. And so because, here, this plus sign looks like a letter, there we go, plus the number of neutrons. And so because I know that my atomic number is the number of protons, it's also technically my atomic number plus the number of neutrons. So then if I subtract the atomic number by the atomic mass, that'll give me the number of neutrons. So if I do 20 minus 10, that tells me I also have 10 neutrons. So looking at a periodic table, I'm able to find out the atomic number. I'm able to find out the atomic mass. I'm able to find the number of protons, electrons, and neutrons. And then finally, depending on which periodic table you're looking at, it might also tell you the elemental group. And so the one that we've been using in class has different color codes. So in the one that's in our notes, it has the color red for neon, which tells us that it is a noble gas. We can also know the group number, which is the one that is on the top. So in this case, the group number for neon is 18. And then the period is the one that goes down the side, and that is 2. So a lot of different information that we can get about an element looking at it on the periodic table. So once again, you can find out atomic number, atomic mass. From that, you can find out protons, electrons, neutrons. You can find out the elemental group, the group number, and the period. So a lot of information about elements when you look them up on the periodic table. So do we want to do another example of this, or are we ready to jump into how stars create elements? Okay. Let me check my email really quick, make sure nobody's trying to get in and can't find us. Cool, looks good. So when we are talking about stars and how they create elements, remember that elements are created by essentially the stars having so much energy, so much heat, so much pressure that they're slamming atoms together. And then when the atoms collide, they can fuse together to form new forms of elements. So it's technically called nuclear fusion because the energy of the star plus the high pressure and temperature like collides or causes atoms to collide. And then when they collide, they fuse into larger atoms. And so let's look at an example here. One of the most common forms of nuclear fusion that happens in a star is being able to fuse together hydrogen into helium. So they would take a hydrogen atom, right? There's a ton of just little hydrogen atoms floating around in the star, and they each have one electron and one proton. And then they get slammed into each other by the pressure of the star, and then that creates, and then there's also just kind of neutrons floating around. So then being slammed together, suddenly they become helium. So these are all hydrogen, these are all helium. And this is happening inside the center of the star. And then you can have bigger ones. So let's say you have helium. Bigger stars have more pressure and more heat. So the bigger stars can create even heavier elements. So let's say helium starts slamming together. And so now we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Now 2 helium being slammed together would create a, let me look at my periodic table, what has a elemental number of 4. So this would be beryllium. And so basically, once again, just being able to slam all these things together in the center of a star will create different forms of atoms. And remember, every different type of atom is a new element. So that's how stars create elements. And then remember that not only do stars create elements, but so do supernovas. A supernova is an explosion of a large star. So our sun is a smaller star. It's a medium-sized star. It won't have a supernova. It's not big enough. But really big stars, when they are at the end of their life, they have a supernova. And that supernova is a giant explosion. And once again, remember, pressure, heat, energy, that's what helps slam atoms together. An explosion is a great example of something that has a lot of pressure, heat, and energy. And so that explosion launches all of these atoms into each other and creates even more elements. The more energy, the more pressure, the heavier elements you can create. So the majority of the heavy elements that we have here on Earth are because of supernovas. Do I have any questions about that process before we jump into the next question? Okay. So what is the difference between an ionic and a covalent bond? How do they use electrons and what do they form? So can anybody tell me what happens with electrons in an ionic bond? I'll give you 2 options. You can tell me which one is correct. For an ionic bond, are electrons shared or are they stolen?
Stolen?
So in an ionic bond, they are stolen or transferred. And so then what happens a covalent bond? What happens with the electrons?
They're shared.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so covalent bond means that they're shared. So what this looks like, if you were to have, let's say we have 2 elements here, you would have this electron would be sent over to this element. In a covalent bond, they would share the electron. So once again, ionic bonds, they transfer or steal electrons. Covalent bonds, they share them. And when you have an ionic bond, what is created is a compound. That's what you call something that's formed by 2 atoms of different elements being bonded by an ionic bond. You call it a compound. For a covalent bond, it creates molecules. And so, for example, water is formed by covalent bonds. And so we call water molecules. You have water molecules. If water was formed by ionic bonds, then you would call them water compounds. But once again, water is covalently bonded, so it's a molecule. Does this make sense? You don't have to explain like how exactly this happens. You just want to be able to know the difference between the two, because this will come up again as we explore what happens in our cells. So that's that. Let's go ahead and jump into then drawing an atom for carbon. Unless, does anybody have any more questions about ionic or covalent bonds? Okay. So we're going to draw an atom for carbon. Carbon has these two numbers here, atomic mass of 12 and an atomic number of 6. So what does my atomic number tell me again? How many do I have of what?
6 electrons and protons.
So my atomic number says we have 6 protons and 6 electrons. And then finding my neutrons here, I subtract the atomic number from the atomic mass, telling me that I also have 6 neutrons. So now that I have that information, I'm going to go ahead and draw it. So there's 2 different ways to draw atoms. There's the shorthand and then there's the longhand. Shorthand would be to just write 6 protons, 6 neutrons, and then I draw my orbitals here with 2 electrons in the first orbital and then 4 electrons in the second orbital. That's my shorthand. If I wanted to take a little bit longer and get more detailed, I could do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These could all be protons. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Those would all be neutrons. And then same thing, this would be my electrons and then electrons here. So both of these are correct. This one just shows you actually how many protons and neutrons are in the center, but I think that these are much easier to read, especially when you get into the higher elements. So I prefer to draw my atoms this way, but this is a more technically correct diagram because you show how many protons and neutrons there are. So, so that is drawing an atom for carbon. Do we want to see one more example of drawing an atom, or are we comfortable with this?
Can I see one more example?
Yeah, let's do a larger one so we can draw more orbitals. Let's do potassium. So potassium, well, actually, I don't know if I'm ready to sign up to draw 40. Let's do a little bit smaller. Let's do sulfur. Sulfur has an atomic number of 16, an atomic mass of 32. So my atomic number tells me I have 16 protons and I have 16 electrons. And then subtracting my atomic number from my atomic mass tells me that I also have 16 neutrons. And so I'm going to draw that in the center here. 16 protons, 16 neutrons. And then let's get started with our electrons. So we go 1, 2. And then we have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But we have 16, so we have to do another one here. So 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. 10, 11, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So that is my sulfur atom. So remember that the big things that you need to be able to do comfortably in order to draw the atoms is to know that your atomic number is equal to the number of protons and the number of neutrons. And then your atomic mass, once again, is the number of protons plus the number of neutrons. And then once again, we know that number of protons is atomic number. So it's also technically the same thing as saying the atomic number plus the number of neutrons. And so that's why to find the number of neutrons, you can subtract the atomic number from the atomic mass, because then when you do the like cross canceling, it all equals out. Okay, let's get into the next one here. So let's expand these following examples of scientific notation. So the first one is 16.2 times 10 to, that is a negative 5. Okay, so this is negative. Which direction am I going to move my decimal?
To the left.
Left.
And how many times am I moving it?
5 times.
We go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. Oh, actually, that was too many zeros. I got too excited. So this is my expanded number here, 0.000162. So that's the first one. Then we'll do 1.2 times 10 to the negative 1. So this is negative. Once again, which direction am I moving?
Left.
Left. How many times?
Once.
Once. Yeah. So then this one is 0.12. Okay, let's do the next one here. This is 7.62 times 10 to the 3. So this one's positive, which means which direction am I moving my decimal?
Right.
So I'm moving it to the right. How many times?
3.
1, 2, 3. Here's a 0. 7, 6, 2, 0. And then let's do the last one here. 3.4 times 10 to the 2. This one is positive, so which direction am I moving my decimal?
Right.
Right. How many times?
Twice.
And there we go. That is my scientific notation. And let me circle these for you. Are we comfortable with doing scientific notation? Would we like a few more examples? Or is this good?
That's good.
Wait, I don't understand. Where's the decimal point on the last one? I can't see it.
Down here?
Would you put it at the after the 0?
Yeah, so it technically moves here. And if you want to, you can do that. And so the same thing if I were to do it here, I could put it at the end. That's not technically wrong. You can do, there's some glare, so let me show you. You can do that if you'd like. It's just more so you're just saying.
And do you have to have that extra 0 after the decimal?
Yeah, and so the way that numbers work is important that you include the numbers. If you press the end of the number, you can add as many zeros as you want. And that doesn't mean the number at all. What does if you had like 20 zeros and then a 6 at the end, that number is different than if I just left it at 340. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's why 40 is fine because there's not really anything after the decimal. If there was something after the decimal, then you'd want to write out all the zeros, which is why we do that here, because there's a 162 at the end of the 3 zeros. Any other questions about this?
You're recording this, so if I missed anything, I could just go back to the video, right?
This is all being recorded. Okay, so now let's expand chemical notation. So remember, chemical notation is just telling me how many of each element I have. So it's really just about being able to look up these elements, the element symbols on the periodic table, to then know how many you have of each one. So the first one here, or rather, let me explain what kind of steps I like to do. So I like to first separate them into how many different elements I know that I have. And remember, each capital letter symbolizes a new element. If there's a lowercase letter, then that's just part of the capital letter before it that just lets you know which element it is. So in my first example here, how many elements do I have? This one up here.
2 elements.
3.
So I have so I have
Yeah,
2
3.
different elements. So I have this one is my first element, and this one is my second element. And then how many elements do I have in this one here? How many different elements?
3.
So this is my first, this one's my second, and this one's my third. So now that I know how many different elements I have, I can look them up on the periodic table to figure out what they actually are. So I know that Na is sodium, and I know that O is oxygen. And then down here, I know that the C is carbon, K is potassium, and Si is silicone. So now I know what the elements are. The last step is to figure out how many of each element I have. So how many do I have of sodium?
1.
Yeah, so remember, if the letters are in there, that means that there's just going to be 1 if there's no number after it. So we've got, let me erase this, we have 1 sodium, and then how many oxygen do I have?
3.
So we have 3 oxygen. Okay, so then how many carbon do I have?
8.
We have 8 carbon. How many potassium do I have?
1. Oh no, 10.
10 potassium. And then I know there's a bad glare. How much silicone do I have?
2.
2.
Perfect. So now I know, looking at this one, I have 1 sodium and 3 oxygen. And then down here, I have 8 carbon, 10 potassium, and 2 silicone. So once again, a chemical equation is just showing you what chemicals, what elements are present in each molecule or compound. And then you can use that information to maybe guess what kind of behavior it would have if it was reacting with something else, or if you were trying to figure out if it's an acid or a base. Knowing what elements are in the chemical let you predict what is going to happen, which is important. If you're doing like something in chemistry, you don't want to mix chemicals that might potentially create like some really hazardous toxic fume, right? You want to know what's going to happen when you put them together. So that's why that's important. So then let's go into the science behind chromatography. So chromatography is what we did when we had the circle and we put in like all the different types of inks, and then we watched to see how far they expanded and which different types of pigments were in there. So chromatography uses the one that we did in class, water as our solvent, and water is polar, which means that there's a positive and a negative side. So if you looked at the molecule, here's oxygen, here's your 2 hydrogens. the hydrogens are positive and the oxygen is negative. And so remember, the polarity of water is really good at dissolving things. So water is our solvent, and then our ink is our solute. It's just what's being dissolved. What is
Miss Burns, I actually have to go now, but thank you. I did get a majority of it done.
awesome, cool. And then if you want to go back and watch through the video, I'll have it posted on Schoology. So you
Okay.
Question, what are you
perfect.
what are you trying to explain with the plus and minus sign on polarity?
plus and minus signs show you the charge. So if you think of this is water. This is like H2O, which is water. If you think of this water molecule as a magnet, the positive side and a negative side, and you know that positive and negative, they attract, positive and positive repel, negative and negative repel. This is just showing you where the charges are, as if this was a magnet. The oxygen side would have more negative, and the hydrogen side would have more positive.
Miss Burns, I actually have to go right now. Thank you so much for holding this, though. I got the majority of it done.
Yeah, no worries. Like I said, everything else will be posted on. So thanks for stopping by and tuning in.
All right, thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks, you too. Okay, so knowing that water is the solvent, it's doing the dissolving, and ink is the solute, it's what's being dissolved. In chromatography, essentially what we want to do is we want to separate the inks. We want to see what different types of inks are making up the color. And so the one that we did in class was black. So we wanted to see what different kinds of pigments make the color black. And so we want to separate the inks. And what we learned is that the inks have different solubility. So that's why solubility, remember, is how easy it is to dissolve it. That's why Sharpies didn't show up very well. Remember how there was like that one that didn't move? That was because it wasn't soluble. Meanwhile, the other ones were soluble. And the more soluble they were, the further down the paper. The less soluble they were, the less they moved. So this is kind of the big thing, is that the inks moved depending on how soluble they were. And that's kind of the science behind chromatography. So as long as you guys are able to know that chromatography is used to separate the different inks based off of how soluble they are, and then water is like what's doing the separation because it's the solvent, it's the thing that's dissolving the ink, then you'll be good to go. Do you guys need me to explain any other parts of chromatography?
There's a glare in between where it says separate the inks.
There we go. So once again, in class, the main idea that we worked with and we experienced was how the water was able to separate all of the different pigments that are used to make the color black, or if you did it at home, whatever other colors there were. So that's chromatography. We've got a few more things I want to just go through a little bit quickly because I know that we might be cutting into time here. So in terms of radioactivity, what makes an element radioactive? Does anybody want to tell me? Does anybody remember? Radioactivity. Why is something radioactive?
Because the atom is unstable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so radioactivity is when you have an atom that is unstable. And what does the atom do in order to become more stable?
It releases energy.
Yeah, so to become stable, the atom releases either energy or particles. So what the atom releases are either an alpha particle. This is what alpha looks like. It's a Greek letter. So this is alpha, a beta particle, which is this one here, or a gamma wave. And I don't remember the Greek symbol for gamma wave, so we're just going to do gamma wave. I'm pretty sure it's either an upside down Y or it's something. Yeah, I don't know. I don't want to confuse you guys. You're doing the wrong one. So there's alpha particle, beta particle, or a gamma wave. So a gamma wave, we'll start here, is kind of like light. Light is also a wave, but gamma wave is just really high energy. So it's just a high energy wave. So then an alpha particle is slow because it's really big. Slow, large, it's made of 2 protons and 2 neutrons. Meanwhile, a beta particle is small and fast, and it is made of just 1 electron. And so what happens in radioactivity is that an atom that is unstable has to release something to become more stable. And it can release either an alpha particle, a beta particle, or a gamma wave. Alpha particles are slow. They're made of 2 protons and 2 neutrons. Beta particles are very fast because they're just 1 electron, so they're super small. And then a gamma wave is a high energy wave. So that's the answer to what makes an element radioactive and what types of particles are released by radioactive elements. Do we have any other questions about that? I know that there's a glare, so let me show you guys this really quick. Any other questions about radioactivity, the particles that are released? This is essentially what you have to know for the test. It's just this. Okay, so let's get into a half-life question. And I'm gonna work through this one, and then if we wanna do more at the end, we can, but I just wanna finish the study guide, and then we can come back and do more half-life examples if we need to, okay? So let's see. So if I have 200 isotopes of chemical X, and it has a half-life of 2 hours, how many isotopes do I have after 6 hours? So remember, what I want to do is first I want to find out the number of half-lives that occur over 6 hours. And to do that, I divide the total amount of time, 6 over the time it takes for a half-life to occur, which is 2 hours in this example. So that means that I have 3 half-lives. So once again, to find out the number of half-lives that occur, it's the total time divided by the length of half-life. So once again, in this case, it's 6 hours divided by 2 hours, which means 3 half-lives occur. So once I find out how many half-lives have happened, that tells me how many times to cut this number in half. And so I have 3 half-lives. So I'm going to say my first, second, and third half-life. My first one is 200 divided by 2, which equals 100. So then that comes over here. My second half-life is 100 divided by 2 equals 50. So then that comes over here. 50 divided by 2 equals 25. So at the end of 6 hours, after 3 half-lives, I have left 25 isotopes. of chemical X. So the big idea here, remember what we really want to focus on while we're trying to figure out the number of isotopes that we have left is we want to figure out how many isotopes do we start off with. We want to know how long a half-life is. We want to know how much time total passed. So then with that information, you can determine how many half-lives occurred over the period of time. So in this case, because my half-life was 2 hours long, over 6 hours, I had 3 half-lives. And during a half-life, the amount of the isotopes is cut in half. And so because I had 3 half-lives, I know that I have to cut this number here, 200, in half 3 times. And so that's why I divide it in half 3 times. So we go 200 divided by 2 is 100, and then cut 100 in half to be 50, and then we cut 50 in half to equal 25. Like I said, we can do more examples of this if we need to after.
Can you do another example?
Yeah, so we'll do another example once we finish the study guide, just because I want to be able to move through it in case anybody has to go, and then we can do as many examples of this as we want. So let's get through the rest of the study guide, and then, like I said, we can jump.
Right, is there a way in Notability to drag what you wrote? Because I wrote something under a question and I wrote it for the wrong, under the wrong question. Can you like drag some?
There's this scissored button, I think, and if you circle like the text that you write with the scissor button, you can then drag it around the document. I believe it's the right button. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's right. Yeah, there's like a little scissor icon thing, and when you push it, then you can circle whatever you wrote and then just drag it to where you want it. But you have to be sure to circle the entire thing or it'll cut some of it off.
Yeah, that's true. And if you circle like a part of a word that you don't want, it'll drag that word too. So you have to like make sure you're only circling what you want to move. Okay, so now let's go into what an isotope is and how do I know if I have an isotope. So an isotope is a version of an element with different numbers of neutrons. So an isotope can have more neutrons or less neutrons, but normally isotopes tend to be unstable. And so that's why we can do the half-life calculations, because we know that if something's unstable, it's going to decay, it's going to like release stuff in order to become stable, and that means that it's going to disappear over time. So let's do an example to how to figure out if you have an element, like how to figure out if it's an isotope. So let's just keep working with carbon because it's a really easy one to work with. So I'm going to have 3 molecules of carbon. We'll do carbon 10, carbon 12, and carbon 14. So carbon 12 is the one that's on the periodic table. It's the most stable, and so it's the one that's most commonly found out in nature. And so I have in my carbon 12, I have 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 6 neutrons. So then let's look at this isotope here. I have 6 protons, 6 electrons, and I have 4 neutrons. So this is an isotope that has less neutrons. And then same thing here, 6 protons, 6 electrons, and then this one has 8 neutrons. So this is an isotope that has more neutrons. These are both isotopes. One has less, one has more. The reason that we know that they're an isotope is because they have a different number of neutrons than the stable version, which is the one that's reported by the periodic table. Does this make sense? Or do we want to do more examples of this one too?
It makes sense.
One does? Okay, cool. Cuckoo. All right, we're getting down to the last of the study guide. What special bonds form between water molecules? Does anybody remember? Let me draw a water molecule here. So we have oxygen, hydrogen. Remember, water is polar, so there's a positive end and a negative end. What special bond forms between each water molecule? If I had like a
Bond?
one more time.
Covalent bond?
Yeah, so that would be used to describe this bond, the one that's between all the elements. That would be a covalent bond because the hydrogen and the oxygen are bonded by a covalent bond. So that's that one. But what is the one that's between each unique water molecule? Like if this was one
Hydrogen bond.
and this is the other water molecule, this is called a hydrogen bond. And the hydrogen bonds form because the positive end is attracted to the negative end. So once again, just think of water molecules like they're magnets. There's a positive end of the magnet and there's a negative end of the magnet. And when you put them together, the positive and the negative sides attract. That's what happens between water molecules, and that attraction is called the hydrogen bond. And the hydrogen bond is super important because it's what allows water to do all of the crazy special things that water can do that keeps us alive. So that's the kind of bond that forms between hydrogen molecules. And then remember, covalent bond is what forms between the elements that make a water molecule. So that's that. What properties allow water to stick together and to other surfaces? What examples of this property or these properties did we learn about? So there's cohesion and there's adhesion. And we just worked with these in the lab in class. So which one of these two allows water molecules to stick to each other? Which one of these is going to help with that? So remember, there's water molecules stick to each other, and there's water molecules stick to like other things. Which one of these did we see helped water molecules stick to each other? This is the one that we did when we were
Cohesion.
Yeah, cohesion. So this is the one where we like putting all the drops onto the slide to see how many would fit. Cohesion is what helped all those water molecules stay in that one giant drop. And so cohesion is attraction between water molecules. This is what allows water to stick to itself. Water sticks to itself. And so then adhesion is the opposite. Adhesion is attraction of water to other substances. And so water sticks to other stuff. And so I'm going to change pens here because my blue is starting to die. Maybe red will be easy to read. So for some examples of cohesion and adhesion, if I were, one of my favorite examples is a dewdrop, because we see dew on the grass all the time. We see dew on leaves. So if I were to have a leaf here, if this is my leaf, and then I've got a water droplet here, this is my dewdrop. Cohesion is what allows the water to stay in the drop form. If there wasn't cohesion, the water would just kind of be everywhere or just be like a layer on top of the leaf. But because of cohesion, it forms a drop. So cohesion creates a drop. Creates the drop. And then adhesion is what keeps the water droplet on the leaf. If there wasn't adhesion, then you just have a bunch of water droplets all over the ground, right? But because adhesion has water sticking to other stuff, this water droplet's able to stick to the leaf. So adhesion sticks to the leaf. Does this example make sense? Would we like to do another example of cohesion and adhesion?
Yes.
So let's think of another example here. Let's talk about the one that we did in class. Let's talk about the slide. So if we have our square slide, remember we did the like the water column. So maybe I should draw the slide a little bit differently. Let's say that the slide is like flat on the table here. So if this is your water droplet, when we did adhesion, we created the water column between that and our finger. So this is our fingernail. So this is adhesion because the water sticks to our finger and to the slide. So adhesion sticks water from the finger to the slide. And then the other one that we did was where we wanted to see how much water we could fit on the slide itself. And that was cohesion because the water was sticking together. And in both of these examples, there's also an example of the other one. So while this is a big example of adhesion, cohesion is still at work because it keeps all the water molecules together in the column. And then in the other example, adhesion is still at work because it keeps all of the water molecules on the slide. So they kind of work together, but if you're trying to be specific, like that's what they did in each example here. So at the end of the day, adhesion's when water sticks to other stuff, and cohesion is when water sticks to itself. Okay, so let's see. Explain how water impacts how its molecules are arranged. Okay, so do we remember how there's a gas, a liquid, and a solid? Normally, elements are the most dense as a solid and the least dense as a gas. But water is a little different. How, at what state is water the most dense?
In its liquid state?
Yeah, so water is most dense as a liquid. And then it's medium density as a solid, and then it's least dense as a gas. Water is least dense. And then it's like medium density. So if you were to draw it, gas is like, here's all these water molecules. They're just kind of doing their own thing. Liquid, there's a bunch of water molecules, but they're kind of doing our own thing nice and close to each other because remember they're attracted to each other. And then in a solid, this is where the hydrogen bonds come into play because remember, if water is like a magnet, if you were to have the positive end and the positive end together, then they would repel each other, right? That's why they form as almost like a pattern in a solid form. They have to keep themselves apart from each other to a degree. And so there's gaps in between each water molecule. And these gaps is what allows, gaps allow ice to float, solid water or ice to float.
You write it on the board too, so that it's just not a picture. You know, like
Yeah,
explain that.
there it is. I think I've got it all on the board for you guys. Does that help? Do we have any other questions about like water and the
Wait, what does the second word say? Like gas?
gas? Water is least dense. Liquid water
No,
is
no, no, the bottom, the picture one.
oh down here. Gaps.
Yeah.
Gaps in the water. So gaps between the water molecules is what allows the solid water or ice to float because it's less dense than liquid water because these gaps exist in a solid form. Okay, we're almost done here. We're gonna kind of move rapid pace because I don't have a ton of questions about this next part on the test just because I know that it's newer. Well, I will say there's stuff about acids and bases on the test, and then the carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids is an extra credit question. So we're gonna go through that a little bit faster. So looking at acids and bases, what numbers on the pH scale represent acids? Can you guys tell me? If my pH scale is from 0 to 14, which numbers are acids, which ones are bases, and which one is neutral?
Would 0 be neutral?
That's a good guess, but not quite. If neutral's in the,
7's neutral.
what's neutral?
7's neutral, and 1 to 7 is acid.
So 0 to 7, or 0 to 6, or you could say, if you have like the table, and it's just kind of like anything that's up to this point is acids. And then, okay, cool. So then what is then a base? If 0 to 6 is acids and 7 is neutral, what is a base?
8 to 14.
So bases are 8 to 14. And so properties of acids and bases. Acids are sour, while bases are bitter. Acids are really good at conducting electricity. Which is why there's a thing called battery acid, because it's good at conducting electricity. Meanwhile, bases are really good at breaking up oil, which is why we use soap when we are cleaning dishes, because if our dishes get oily, we use soap, and soap is a base. And then another thing about acids is they turn blue litmus paper red, and then bases turn red litmus paper blue. And then the last thing, you guys don't really need to know this. If you know even like 2 of these properties, you'll be good to go. But because I'm a science teacher, I have to go into the last detail here, that acids are an acid because they have a lot of H+ ions, while bases have a lot of OH-. And this is hydroxide, or this is hydroxide, this is hydrogen. So once again, you don't.
Did you unshare this? Oh, for a second, my screen was black.
That's okay. But yeah, so this is acids versus bases. Water is neutral. So this is essentially water. Depending on the water that you drink, if you have a fancy water, sometimes they make more basic water or more alkaline water. They say it's healthier for you. The science is kind of out on that, but water is in the middle. And then acids are sour. They conduct electricity. So an example of acids are battery acid. Another example is like lemon juice. And then they turn blue litmus paper red. Bases are bitter. They break up oil, so soap is a good example, and they turn red litmus paper blue. I can't really think of any foods that I know of that are basic. I'll get back to you guys on that. I'll have to look up some examples. But do I have any other questions about acids, bases, pH scale, anything like that? because we're getting to the last 4 questions on the study guide, and then we can come back and do another example of half.
Wait, what is the property?
Properties are basically any of these things. So properties include that they're sour, they conduct electricity, they turn blue litmus paper red, they have hydrogen ions, and then bases properties are that they bitter, they break up oil, they turn red to blue, and they have hydroxide ions. So, so any of these are properties. Any character.
So on the test, do we need to write like all of them, or it can be just sour and bitter?
That depends on the question. The question might ask you for 1 property, the question might ask you for 2.
Is the question going to be like mostly the study guide?
I'm not going to have like the same exact questions on there, but the study guide will definitely help you when it comes to answering the questions on the test. I will say that. Okay, last 4 questions. We're going to do carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So, have you guys had a chance to get through all of the macromolecules worksheets yet, or are you still working on those?
I'm still working on that.
Okay. Then I will just go through this really quickly because then that way we can have more time to do an example of the isotopes. So some functions of carbohydrates, carbs, have instant energy.
What's the main function though?
Instant energy. Carbs are like sugar. If you want to have energy, if you're like running a marathon, then you're gonna want sugar. You want like Gatorade. It has electrolytes and sugar in it because that just keeps you going, right? So carbs are instant energy, and they can also be used for like structure, for like plants. An example is sugar. Lipids are also known as fats. There's a few different main functions. So lipids can help insulate. And what that means is that they protect from the cold. They can protect, or rather, let me say this, they can cushion organs. So that's why, like, no matter how skinny you are, you're still gonna have a little bit of fat over your body because it helps protect all of your organs inside. Like without the fat cushion, then you wouldn't be protected. They're also good at long-term energy storage. So when fat burns, it releases a lot of energy versus when carbs burn. And that's why fat can make you fat, because it has a lot more calories in it per like gram, I guess, than carbs. So that's fats. Proteins are really important because they make up amino acids. And amino acids are like the building blocks, or they're the builders, I guess you would say, the builders of the body. They do a ton of different things. Amino acids help build DNA. They help build RNA. They help build other proteins. They help communicate messages across the body. So the biggest thing about proteins is that they have amino acids. And then finally, nucleic acids are DNA and RNA. And this is the genetic material, the genetic like recipe that makes us all us. Our DNA is what says Hannah has, or I guess Mrs. Burns. Mrs. Burns has brown hair. Well, I guess right now it's not necessarily brown, but when I was born, it was brown hair. My DNA is the reason that I have, that I'm 5'8". My DNA is why I have size 8.5 feet. Like that's, all of those properties are based off of my DNA. The RNA is essentially just a version of DNA that is copied by amino acids to build more proteins. And we'll get into that later on when we get into cell function, but our body has both DNA and RNA. So this is like the main functions of each of those macromolecules. Let me like hold this up so you guys, if you want to like screenshot it or something, you can. And then we can do another example of radioactive decay, if you would.
I
had a
question. What are we
question.
supposed to?
Oh, okay. First question, go ahead. I didn't-
My question was, is this being like recorded so that I could, because I missed the beginning of this. So I was wondering if I'd be able to still go back and be able to see the beginning of the recording.
Yeah, this is being recorded. You can find it on Schoology in the recorded classes section. I have to upload it, and so it'll take a little bit of time to upload, but once it uploads, I'll send an email out to everybody and let them know that it's up on Schoology.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then Riley, what was your question?
All right, what were we supposed to do for that thing where it has the pictures on the macromolecules?
Picture of the different food labels for the food that you think is like best to then satisfy like what the question is. So like the first one was, what food would you eat to get instant energy? And so you would find something that you think would have like a lot of carbs in it. And then you would show me the nutrition label and say, boom, this has a ton of carbs in it. I know that carbs give me instant energy, so this is what I would eat. And then you just kind of explain to me what the food is. You'd show me the nutrition label, and then you would tell me like what macromolecules are in it and why it's a good option.
Macromolecules, hydrogen, lipids, and acids.
Macromolecules are carbs, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Yeah. Okay, let's do. This was not a good day to wear white pants. My hands are so dirty now. Okay, so let's do another example of radioactive decay. If we want to do another one after that, we can, but I don't want to keep you guys too long. I know that it's already been almost an hour and a half. So thank you guys for going through the study guide with me. So let's see. Let's do one more example. Let's say that I'm going to have, we'll have 30 isotopes. Let's say it has a half-life of 4 hours. And I want to know how many after 8 hours. So first thing I want to do is find the number of isotopes, or sorry, I want to find the number of half-lives. So I divide my total amount of time, 8, by my length of my half-life, which is 4, which means I have, over the span of 8 hours, 2 half-lives. And so now that I know I have 2 half-lives, that tells me I have to cut this number in half 2 times. So first half-life, second half-life. So the first one, I do 30 divided by 2 equals 15. And then 15 divided by 2 equals 7.5. So after 8 hours, I have 7.5 isotopes left. What part of this are we having a hard time with? Let me know what part we want to like get a little bit deeper into. What's causing some trouble with this? Or is this making sense now? This is where I need you guys to tell me, because
Starting to make sense now.
it's making sense now.
Wait, can you go over number 3?
Number 3 in the study guide, how are electrons arranged in orbitals?
Yes.
Yeah, I can do that. Let me do one more example of this, and then I can show you that, Rashad, and then we can end the session. Reminder, I'll post this on Schoology too, so you guys can watch through it again if you want to see any more examples. So let's do one more example of half-life here. And then we can jump into that one last example. So how many isotopes do we want to do? Let's say we have, let's do 24 isotopes. I'll have a half-life of 3 hours. And how many do I have after 9 hours? So the number of half-lives, I divide my total amount of time, which is 9, by the length of my half-life, which is 3. 3 goes into 9 3 times. And so that tells me that over the course of 9 hours, I have 3 half-lives. And so then I'm going to divide 24 in half 3 times. So 24 divided by 2 is 12. 12 divided by 2 is 6. And 6 divided by 2 is 3. So at the end of 9 hours, I have 3 isotopes left of this chemical, because I divided my total amount of time by the length of my half-life, which told me that there were 3 half-lives that passed. And remember, during a half-life, that tells me like how long it took for something to be cut in half. So if 3 half-lives passed, then I know that the number was cut in half 3 times, and that's what led me to getting the number 3. So I'm hoping that these examples will help you guys out on the test there. And then if you guys want to go, then you're welcome to go. Rashad, I can show you number 3 really quickly, unless there's any more questions before I jump into that. You guys have anything else that you would like me to explain before I do the electron arrangement in orbitals?
I'm pretty good so far.
Cool. Alrighty, so let me.
So then I'm excused if I don't have any further questions.
Oh yeah, you're good to go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so let me show you this, Rashad. So let's do neon. Neon has an atomic number of 10 and an atomic mass of 20. So that tells me I have 10 protons, 10 electrons, and then I have 10 neutrons. So when I draw it, I have to know how many electrons can go in how many orbitals. So in the middle, I have 10 protons and 10 neutrons. My first orbital has 2 electrons, and then every orbital after my first one can have 8. So that's why when you're drawing electrons, the first orbital is only going to have 2 electrons, and then every orbital after it will have 8, or can have 8. It won't always be full. So like if I were to do, let me see, what is one larger than neon is sodium. So sodium is 1123, and this is 11, and this is 12 neutrons. Then I would do 11p, 11n. It would be then it would look like that. So essentially, then the answer to that question, how are electrons arranged in orbitals and how is the first orbital different? So electrons are arranged 2 in the first orbital and then 8 in the second, third, fourth, fifth, as many are after the first orbital, can fit 8 electrons. Does that help answer that question for you?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, cool. Any other questions, or are you good to go?
I wasn't here for number 1 and number 2.
Okay.
So can you go over that one?
Yeah, I can
Just
go,
the first 2.
I'll go through those first 2 really quick. And then if you want more details, then like I said, you can also rewatch the video too. So
Yeah.
in atom, there are protons, neutrons, and electrons. Protons are positive, electrons are negative, and neutrons are neutral. So neutron, neutral, that means they have no charge. And then protons are found in the nucleus. So are neutrons. And electrons are found in the orbitals. And so 2 in the first one, first orbital, and then 8 in all the other ones. And that is, the answers to 1 and 2. Protons, neutrons, electrons. Protons are positive in the nucleus. Neutrons are neutral in the nucleus, and electrons are negative in the orbitals.
Okay.
Cool. Alrighty. Anything else that you need from me?
Number 2.
This is number 2. So
Oh,
number 1 is protons, neutrons, electrons, and then number 2 is their charge.
oh, okay.
where they
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Cool. Thank
All
you.
right, have a good one.
You too.
Thank you for it.